It was Christmas Eve. The fireplace was warm. The table was set. Turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, all his favorites. I waited, my hands shaking as I lit the last candle. He walked in, my son. He didn't smile. He didn't sit. He looked at me like I was a stranger. And then, he said it. You are no longer a family. We have passed. For a moment, time stopped. My heart did too. The warmth in the room turned cold. My wife gasped. The room fell silent. Asterisk, the living room glowed in soft golden hues, dressed in everything that spoke of love, memory, and hope. The tree stood tall in the corner, its branches adorned with old ornaments, some faded, some cracked, all precious. Each one held a memory. His first Christmas ornament, the handmade snowflake from kindergarten, the red glass ball that used to hang near his bedroom door when he was a boy. I placed them all carefully, deliberately. Maybe, just maybe, he'd notice. Maybe he'd remember. The smell of cinnamon and cloves filled the house. I had spent hours preparing the dinner. I roasted the turkey with rosemary just like he used to ask for as a teenager. The stuffing was homemade, a recipe from my mother that he once said was better than any restaurant. Even the cranberry sauce, which no one really cared about, I made fresh because he used to say it tasted like his childhood. I ironed the napkins, the good ones, the ones we kept for real occasions. I lit candles, placed named cards with silver ink, and set the table in perfect symmetry. His seat was at the head of the table, not mine, his. That was deliberate. It wasn't just dinner. It was a silent plea. This Christmas wasn't like the others. Not like the ones where he ran down the stairs in footy pajamas. Not like the ones where we laugh over burnt cookies or argue about who got the last piece of pie. No, this year was different. This year, I was trying to stitch something broken, something torn apart years ago by things said in anger and things left unsaid in regret. The last time I saw him, he walked out the door with fire in his eyes and pain in his voice. I had shouted. He had shouted louder, and after that, silence. Months passed, then years. A few text messages here and there, but the distance, it was more than miles. So tonight, I tried again. I bought him a gift. Not just any gift. The leather journal he always wanted. The one he saw in that old bookstore downtown when he was 16. He had begged me to get it. I said no then, brushed it off like it was silly. But I remembered. It was wrapped perfectly with a small note inside. Some memories don't fade. I hope we can write new ones. I sat down, wiping my hands on my apron. The clock ticked. My heart beat faster with each second. My wife came in, smiling weakly. Her eyes were already red. She was hopeful too, though we didn't say it out loud. We both knew this dinner was more than a meal. It was a bridge, one we prayed he'd walk across. The doorbell rang. She looked at me. I looked at her. My breath caught. I stood slowly, walked to the door, and opened it. There he was, taller than I remembered, older. His hair was shorter, his eyes colder. Behind him, his wife and his daughter, our granddaughter. The little girl I'd only seen in photos, never held in my arms. My throat tightened. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything. I stepped aside. Come in, I whispered. They entered. The warmth of the house embraced them, but their expressions stayed icy. He looked around. I watched his eyes scan the room, the tree, the ornaments, the table, the old piano, his childhood. But he said nothing. We all took our places at the table. The air was thick with things unspoken. He sat at the head. I sat to his right, his mother to his left. The candles flickered. The music played softly in the background, instrumental carols that used to fill the house every Christmas. And then, just as I picked up the carving knife to serve the turkey, he stood, cold, still, unblinking. His voice cut through the silence. You are no longer our family. We have passed. Asterisk, the wind outside had picked up, rattling the windows with a whisper of winter's breath. I remember standing by the kitchen door, peering through the lace curtains like a nervous child waiting for something magical or devastating. The clock struck 6, then 6:15, then 6:30. He was late, but not unusually so. He'd always been the kind to arrive fashionably late, except this time, it didn't feel fashionable. It felt deliberate. My wife, bless her heart, kept trying to make small talk. Maybe traffic's bad, she said, stirring the gravy with hands that trembled slightly, or maybe they stopped for a last-minute gift. But I knew better. He wasn't late because of traffic. He was late because he didn't want to come. And yet, a part of me prayed I was wrong. At 6:43, the headlights cut across the snow in the driveway. My heart stopped. I couldn't move. He was here. I called softly. He's arrived. My wife nodded, wiping her hands on her apron, straightening her blouse, fixing her hair like it mattered, like tonight was a first date with hope. I walked toward the door slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. I opened it before he could knock. He stood there in a long black coat, his face unreadable, not a flicker of a smile, not a trace of warmth. Beside him, his wife held their daughter's hand, the little girl hiding behind her leg, peeking at me curiously. She looked so much like him at that age. It broke something in me, the same eyes, the same innocence, untouched by whatever storm had driven him so far from me. I opened the door wider. "Please, come in," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might shatter. They stepped in, slowly, cautiously, like strangers entering an unfamiliar place. His eyes scanned the room like a guest at a museum, not with wonder, but with detachment. He took in the decorations, the flickering candles, the photo frames on the mantel. But he said nothing. He didn't say, "Wow, the place looks nice." He didn't say, "You put up the old train set." He didn't even say, "Hello," not a hug, not a handshake. Just a nod. Cold, mechanical. His daughter let go of her mother's hand for a second and walked toward the tree, mesmerized by the blinking lights. I smiled and took a step forward, hoping to kneel, to say hi, but he moved swiftly, placing a hand on her shoulder and pulling her gently back. "Not now," his eyes said. "Not yet." I stepped back. My wife greeted his wife with a polite embrace. They exchanged soft words, nothing meaningful, surface-level kindness, the kind you offer in a room where old wounds are still bleeding. He took off his coat and hung it carefully. Then, with the calm of a man at a funeral, he walked toward the table. He looked at the place setting I made just for him, his name written in silver calligraphy, the crystal glass beside his plate, the little candy cane placed lovingly at the edge. He sat down without a word. His wife sat beside him, their daughter, quietly next to her. My wife sat opposite him, and I slowly took my seat at the end. The room was warm, but his presence brought a chill. No one spoke for a long moment. The soft hum of carols played in the background. Bing Crosby sang about white Christmases, but in that moment, it felt anything but white. It was gray, muted, heavy. I tried to meet his eyes, but he looked away. He poured himself water, adjusted his napkin, took in the smells of the food, but not once did he look at me. It was as if I was part of the room, the wallpaper, the chair, invisible. And then, just as I reached for the carving knife, he stood. He looked straight at me, finally, and in a voice void of emotion, he said, "You are no longer our family. We have passed." It happened so fast, and yet, in my memory, it plays in slow motion, like the final crack of a glass already split down the middle. He stood, not abruptly, not with force, but deliberately, like he had rehearsed it, like every breath before. This moment was leading here. The room, which moments ago was filled with the quiet sounds of clinking cutlery and low carols, fell into an eerie silence. I looked up from the turkey, the carving knife still in my hand, and met his eyes. They weren't angry. They weren't sad. They were distant, dead, almost, like he had already said goodbye long ago. And now he was just finishing the sentence. My wife froze, her fork midair. She blinked once, then twice. He took a breath, and then he said it. "You are no longer our family. We have passed." There was a sentence so short, so clean. It had carried the weight of every broken moment, every word we didn't say, every wound we never healed. My mind struggled to understand. "What?" I whispered, but even my own voice didn't sound real. His wife looked down. His daughter clung to her sleeve. He didn't explain. He didn't soften the blow. He simply sat back down, calmly, as if he had said nothing more than "Please pass." The salt. My wife's lips trembled. She turned to him, barely breathing. "What does that mean, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice cracking like old wood. He didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead, focused, resolved, It means, he said, we've moved on from the past, from the hurt, from pretending. Pretending. That word hit me harder than the rest. Pretending. Was that what all these years were to him? The bedtime stories, the camping trips, the times I carried him on my shoulders through crowded parks, the nights I stayed awake holding his fevered hand. Were they pretend? I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. I wanted to say, please explain, but all I could manage was silence, a silence that echoed louder than any scream. He went on, his tone unshaken. We've decided to leave the past in the past. We have our own lives now, our own rules, our own peace. We don't need this performance anymore. Performance, was this all a play to him now? The candles, the tree, the gifts, the home that I tried so hard to make feel safe again. It was all just a backdrop to a scene he no longer wanted to be part of. I thought we were healing. I whispered, finally finding my voice. I thought tonight could mean something. He turned to me for the first time that evening. He looked into my eyes, and what I saw there was worse than hatred. It was indifference. It means something to you, he said, not to us. And just like that, my world collapsed. I looked at my wife. Her eyes were wet, her hands shaking. She tried to reach for him, but he pulled away, gently but firmly. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't loud. He was final. That's what scared me the most. Not that he was angry, but that he was done. The food sat untouched. The fire crackled in the background. Bing Crosby still sang about joy and bells and love, but all I heard was the pounding of my heart in my ears. My son had declared his departure, not in footsteps, but in words. A sentence, 12 words, and in those 12 words, he took everything with him. I wanted to rewind, to unsay all the things that led to this, to undo the years of silence, the pride, the anger, but you don't get rewinds in real life. Only the sound of your son saying, you are no longer our family. We have passed. And the terrifying, empty space that follows. Asterisk, I turned to look at her. The woman who had carried him inside her, nursed him with her own hands, stayed up through the fevers, the heartbreaks, the tantrums, the triumphs, and in that moment, she broke, not with sound, not with a scream or a cry, but with a stillness, a terrifying stillness. She didn't speak at first. Her fork dropped from her hand and clinked against the porcelain plate. The sound far too loud for such a quiet room. Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes blinked once, then froze wide open. She turned her head toward him slowly, like someone afraid of what they'd see. Past, she finally whispered, her voice so faint, so fragile, like it might shatter under its own weight. Past what? He didn't answer. He looked straight ahead, into the fireplace. Refusing to meet her eyes, she sat up straighter, one hand reaching toward her chest like she couldn't breathe. It was instinct, the way her hand searched for something solid to hold onto, to stop her heart from falling. I watched the color drain from her face. You know, people think heartbreak is loud, that it comes with shouting, tears, chaos. But this was worse. This was the heartbreak that makes the air vanish. The kind that slows time. The kind that rips your soul in silence. You're my son, she whispered, her voice cracking mid-sentence. Still. No answer. Still. He didn't look at her. And that was the cruelty of it all. Not just the words he said, but the ones he didn't. He wouldn't even give her his eyes. She had waited so long for this moment, held on to every birthday he didn't call, lit candles on every Christmas he missed, kept his room untouched for years, just in case he came home, just in case he forgave, just in case he remembered. She had cooked his favorite dishes, set the table with love, worn the sweater he bought her years ago, the one she never washed too many times because she feared it would fade. And now he sat there and told her they had passed, like she was a grave, a memory, something to mourn and move on from. She stood up, slowly, uncertainly, one hand pressed against the back of her chair for balance, her breath shallow. You think you can erase us? She asked, her voice trembling. After everything, after all we gave you, after all we lost for you, still nothing. She stepped around the table, her slippers quiet against the floor, and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. He flinched, a small, subtle motion, but enough to tell her the truth she had refused to believe until now. She was no longer welcome in his life. He wasn't here for peace. He wasn't here for healing. He was here to deliver a verdict, and now she had received it. Her hand dropped from his shoulder, her fingers curling into her palm like they didn't know what else to hold. Anto, I don't know what happened to you, she whispered, her voice hollow, but I hope one day you remember who we were, who I was. She turned around and walked slowly to her chair. I saw her wipe her eyes quickly, discreetly, as if ashamed of her tears, but I wasn't ashamed. I was angry. I wanted to stand up, to defend her, to defend us, but something kept me frozen. Guilt, maybe, or fear, or the crushing realization that nothing we could say would matter anymore. She sat down quietly, folded her hands in her lap, didn't look at him again, didn't speak for the rest of the night, but I could see it in her eyes. Something inside her had died, not just the dream of reconciliation, not just the image of a healed family. No, something deeper, something maternal, the unspoken promise between a mother and her son that no matter what happens, they would always find their way back to each other. Tonight, he broke that promise, and she, the strongest woman I've ever known, sat there beside the untouched cranberry sauce and quietly mourned the son who was still alive, but had chosen to leave. After what felt like a century wrapped in silence, he finally spoke again. His voice was calm, measured, not angry, which, somehow, made it worse. I didn't come here to hurt you, he said, looking at his plate, not at us. But I needed to say it, to be clear. He wasn't just making a statement now. He was handing us his reasons, not to open the door, but to close it with finality. You don't get to pretend nothing happened. He continued, you don't get to sit at this table, smile, carve a turkey, and erase the damage. He looked up then, at me, not through me, at me, and in that moment, I knew this was about more than tonight, more than the argument years ago, more than the silence that followed. This was years in the making. You raised me with expectations I could never live up to. He said, everything I did, you criticized. Every choice I made, you questioned. You made me feel like I wasn't yours, just someone borrowing space in your home. His voice didn't shake. He had rehearsed this, maybe in the mirror, maybe in the car outside, before walking in, or maybe for years in his head. You may not remember the words, he added, but I do, every one of them, the day I told you I wanted to study art instead of law. You laughed, called it childish, said I'd be a failure. I opened my mouth, ready to defend myself. I was scared, that's all. But his voice rose just slightly, silence in the room. And when I got accepted into that arts college, you didn't congratulate me. You called it a waste of tuition. My wife turned to me, her eyes wide with heartbreak. She hadn't known, or maybe she had, but thought it was long forgiven. But he hadn't. He turned to her, then, softer now, and Mom, you tried. I know you did, but you never stood up for me. Not really, not when it counted. She let out a soft cry, quiet and sharp, like something inside her just cracked a little more. You let him define who I should be, he said gently, and when I couldn't be that, you let him push me away. I was never pushing you away, I said quickly, almost involuntarily. He looked at me like he was staring at a stranger's lie. Were you? He asked. Do you remember my 18th birthday? I invited you to my art show, my first public gallery display. You said you had a meeting, and you never came. I remembered. God help me. I remembered, and I remembered telling myself it was just one event. He'd understand. I'd make it up to him, but I never did, and that night, While he stood in front of a canvas full of colors and vulnerability, I was at a bar, pretending I didn't feel the guilt burning in my chest. "You missed the most important parts of my life," he said, softer now, but firmer. "And when I stopped calling, you didn't chase me." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "We've been to therapy," he added. "Together, me, my wife, and my daughter. We talked, we grieved. We learned that healing sometimes means letting go." That word again, letting go. "So yes," he said, We've passed through the pain, the confusion, the guilt. We've reached the other side, and on that side, you're not part of our story anymore." His daughter looked up at him, eyes big, innocent, not yet fully understanding what all of this meant, but feeling it, feeling the tension, the ache. And in his arms, she looked so safe, so sure of him, of this decision. "I'm protecting her," he said quietly, nodding toward his daughter. "From the silence I grew up with, from the conditional love, from the weight of not being enough." I swallowed hard. I wanted to tell him he was enough, that he always was. I just didn't know how to show it, didn't know how to say it in time. But the damage, it had already been done, and now he was here, not as a son seeking warmth, but as a man delivering closure, asterisk as he finished speaking. I felt something inside me collapse, not like a building in flames, but like a quiet surrender. A part of me, long locked away behind pride and distance, was now exposed, and there was no place left to hide. Guilt has no sound, no shape. It's not something you can point to, but it lives inside you. It waits and waits until the moment you can no longer outrun it, and then it floods everything. That moment was now. I looked at my son, not the man sitting across the table, but the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders, the one who used to fall asleep in the back seat with jelly on his cheeks, the boy who once told me, "You're my hero, Dad." When did I stop being that? Was it the first time I called his dream impractical? The day I missed his school play for a client dinner? Or when I told him that life doesn't care about feelings, only results? Maybe it wasn't just one moment. Maybe it was 1,000 little ones, so small I barely noticed them at the time, but he did. He carried them all, and now he had placed them in front of me, one by one, like evidence in a trial, and I couldn't argue with any of it. I was guilty. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that built his crib, the same hands that taught him how to ride a bike, the same hands that pointed fingers when he brought home grades lower than I expected, hands that applauded when he did what I approved of, and stayed still when he didn't. I never meant to. I began, but the words just hung there. Because what was I even trying to say? That I didn't mean to break him. That I didn't realize I was building a wall between us every time I used disappointment instead of encouragement. I glanced at my wife. She looked at me, eyes full of tears, but also something else. Something that said, "Why didn't you fix it when you had the chance?" Because I thought I had time. I thought sons always come back. I thought love could survive silence. But silence, I've learned, is not neutral. It grows thorns, and in all those years of not calling, of not visiting, of not saying I'm sorry when I knew I should have, the thorns wrapped themselves around him. And now, he was bleeding. "I was trying to protect you," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't want you to suffer. I wanted you to succeed, to survive." He looked at me, not angry, not moved, just tired. "Maybe I didn't need to be protected," he said. "Maybe I just needed to be seen." I closed my eyes. How many times had I mistaken fear for discipline? How many moments did I trade for roles? I remembered his drawings, how excited he was to show them to me as a child. He once brought me a crayon sketch and said, "It's a house where we're all happy." I laughed and said, "Nice, but next time, draw something real." I crushed his spirit, not with fists, but with dismissals. And the worst part, I didn't even notice that now here we were, Christmas dinner, candles flickering, food untouched. And my son, the boy I raised, was telling me that I was no longer part of his life, not because of one big mistake, but because of a lifetime of small ones I refused to admit. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I wanted to reach across the table, to grab his hand, to beg, but I didn't, because deep down I knew guilt doesn't earn forgiveness. It only confesses, and right now, I had nothing to offer him except the truth. I failed, not in the loud ways people expect, but in the quiet ones, the missed birthdays, the forced paths, the absence when it mattered. I failed him, and now he was strong enough to leave, and I was broken enough to finally understand why. I looked around the table, and I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about me anymore. The silence wasn't only between father and son. It had spread, like ink on water, like a crack through glass, and now the divide wasn't between him and me. It was between everyone. My daughter sat frozen, head low, eyes fixed on the linen napkin in her lap, as if it could somehow distract her from the hurricane tearing through our family. She hadn't said a word since he arrived, not one. Earlier in the kitchen, she'd smiled as she poured wine, asked about how much stuffing to make. She had been the peacemaker all these years, the bridge, the glue. But now she was quiet. Her mouth was shut, and I realized she had known. She knew this was coming. She didn't look surprised. She looked resigned. I wanted to ask her, did you know he would say that? Did you talk to him before this dinner? But I didn't, because part of me already knew. The answer, across from her, her husband, my son-in-law, was motionless too, not out of shock, but discomfort. His fork barely moved. His eyes stayed low. He wasn't part of the war, but he was sitting in the battlefield, hoping no one handed him a weapon. He had always been neutral, kind, polite, but tonight, his silence spoke louder than his presence, and the child, my granddaughter, she was coloring quietly on a napkin with a pen she'd taken from her mother's purse. Innocent, unaffected, maybe, but only on the surface. Children know when love breaks. They feel it, even when no one tells them, even when the turkey's still warm and the lights are still twinkling. She looked up at me once, just for a second, and I saw something in her gaze that crushed me. She didn't know who I was. Not really. Not like a granddaughter should know her grandfather. She had no memories of playing in the yard with me. No storybook endings. No birthday surprises. No inside jokes or secret cookies under the table. I wasn't a character in her world. Just a name. Just a chair at the table. And in that moment, I felt it deep in my gut. I hadn't just lost a son. I was losing a family piece by piece. Not through yelling. Not through arguments, but through quiet disconnections, unspoken disappointments, rooms full of people who no longer felt like us. My wife, still staring into nothing, hadn't said another word since her hand slipped off his shoulder. She looked smaller now, like the weight of the moment was pressing down on her spine. And me, I sat in the middle of it all, the man who had built this home brick by brick and somehow turned it into a place. No one wanted to stay. I could feel it happening, right then. Not tomorrow, not next year, right now. At that table, the center of our family was splitting. My son had drawn the line. My daughter didn't cross it. My wife was stuck between heartbreak and helplessness. And I was the crack beneath all of it. One family, one table, but 1,000 miles apart. I wanted to say something, anything, but what do you say when your family is crumbling around you, not with fire, but with silence? What do you say when your son doesn't see you as a father anymore? When your daughter looks at you with quiet fear, not admiration? When your granddaughter barely knows your name? You don't say anything. You sit there, and you watch the empire you tried to build with rules and routines fall to its knees from the absence of love. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a reckoning. A moment where we stopped pretending that a turkey and string lights could fix the things we refused to talk about. This was the divide, not because we were angry, but because we were tired, and tired people don't scream. They drift, Asterisk, I don't know what made me do it. Maybe desperation, maybe instinct. Maybe I just couldn't take one more moment of sitting in that room, pretending my heart wasn't being ripped out in slow motion. So I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I just quietly walked away from the table and disappeared into the hallway. The old photo albums were still on the shelf. The ones she used to organize by hand, labeled by year, tied with ribbons, and stacked like fragile memories. I hadn't opened them in a long time. Some part of me thought that avoiding the past would somehow protect the future. But now, I knew better. I pulled out the green one, the one with the torn leather cover, and I flipped fast at first. Then slowly, there was page 17, a photograph I hadn't seen in years, but one that had lived in the back of my mind like a ghost proud to haunt. He was 7. We were at the park. He was holding my hand, his face bright, sunlit, wild with laughter. His hair was messy from running. There was dirt on his jeans, and on his other hand, a melting red popsicle that had stained his fingers sticky. He was happy, not just smiling for the camera happy, but deeply, freely, childishly happy. And I was smiling too, not with pride, not with expectation, but with love, pure, unfiltered love. I slipped the photo out of the sleeve, held it tightly between my fingers, and walked back into the room. The conversation hadn't resumed. No one had touched their food. The fireplace crackled behind them, but the warmth was gone. I placed the photo gently in front of him. He looked at it, stared for a long moment. The silence held its breath. That was the summer after your mom got sick. I said softly, you wanted to cheer her up. You picked wildflowers from the park and said they were medicine from the trees. You remember. He didn't respond, but I saw it. A flicker, a tiny flash of something behind his eyes. Recognition? Pain? Maybe both. I leaned back, careful not to crowd him. You held my hand the whole walk home. I continued. You said, if I don't let go, you'll never leave. He blinked, and there it was again, that flicker. The memory had found him. He reached for the photo slowly. His fingers brushed against mine. And for the first time that evening, he didn't pull away. His eyes scanned every inch of that faded print, not just the faces, but the feelings. And for just a second, just one, he wasn't a man made of stone. He was my son, my little boy, the one who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, the one who wrote Dad in crayon on every Father's Day card, followed by lopsided hearts. His wife looked at him gently. She placed a hand on his arm, and even she saw the change. But like most sparks, it didn't last. He sighed, a quiet, trembling breath. Then he carefully placed the photo back on the table, and he said, that was before, just 3 words. But they cracked something open inside me. Before what? I asked, barely able to speak. He didn't answer. Right away. He looked at the fire, then at his daughter, then back at me, before it all changed. He said, he pushed the photo back across the table. I remember that day. He added, I also remember you leaving for a business trip 2 days later. Mom was still sick. I asked where you were. She said you had a meeting in Chicago. I thought you'd come back that night. He looked at me directly now. You didn't. And just like that, the spark was gone. Not smothered, not erased, just tucked back into the drawer of disappointments that had filled his life. But for that one moment, I had seen him reach, maybe out of nostalgia, maybe out of hope, maybe out of a child's desperate longing to find the father he once believed in. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something. And sometimes, something is all you get. He didn't finish his meal. None of them did. The turkey sat untouched. The cranberry sauce congealing in silence. The mashed potatoes had cooled. Just like the air between us. No one said they were leaving. No one had to. You could feel it in the room. Like a wave receding before a storm. His wife folded her napkin with care, tucking it beside her plate. Their daughter stood without needing to be told. It was practiced. like they had rehearsed this part to dot goodbyes dot, but not the warm kind, not the kind wrapped in hugs and promises to call. No, this was the kind that left fingerprints on your soul and slammed the door without sound. My wife remained seated, eyes glassy, lips pressed together as if she were holding something in, a scream, maybe, or a final plea. I stood, my legs unsteady. My son reached into his coat pocket. I thought maybe a card, a letter, a photo. But what he pulled out was a small white envelope. He placed it on the table beside the cold gravy boat. Read it, he said, after we're gone. He didn't look at me. Not when he said it. Not when he turned to put his daughter's coat on. And then, without ceremony, without fanfare, without the words I had spent years hoping to hear, they walked to the door. I followed, not knowing why they didn't turn back. He opened the door. The cold air rushed in, replacing the warmth we had fought to create. And then they were gone. The door clicked shut. The silence afterward was unbearable. I stood there, still holding the photo he had just returned to me, still holding the pieces of a Christmas I thought would save us. For a long moment, I didn't move. My wife walked to the kitchen. Slowly, mechanically, she turned off the oven, unplugged the tree lights. Blown-out candles flickered into smoke. The room dimmed. And then I sat down. The envelope was still there, untouched, mysterious, heavy. I picked it up with trembling hands. My fingers hesitated at the edge of the flap. I didn't know what I was about to read. An ultimatum, a farewell, a final verdict. I opened it. Inside, one small note card, handwritten. 5 words. Find us when you're ready. I read it once, twice, again and again. And each time, it hit differently. Find us when you're ready. It wasn't a closure. It was a crack in the door, a whisper of possibility. And below the words, paperclipped carefully, was a photograph. Now an old one, a new one, the 4 of them, taken maybe a few weeks ago, smiling in front of a pine tree, all wearing matching sweaters. My granddaughter sitting on her father's shoulders, reaching for a star. He looked happy, not just tolerably happy, genuinely, peacefully, deeply happy. It hit me harder than anything else that night. He had built something beautiful. Without me. He had healed without me, but he hadn't destroyed the bridge completely. He had left it standing, just far enough away that I would have to walk to it. He was saying, if you want to know us again, it's possible, but not on my terms. Not with rules, not with lectures, not with expectations and conditions. I would have to be different, not just regretful, but ready. Not ready to fix them, but ready to fix me. And for the first time that night, I cried, not because I lost him, but because maybe, just maybe, I hadn't. Not completely. There was a door still slightly open. A space in their lives I hadn't earned yet, but could still fight for, if I was ready. The note lay in my lap. 5 words. Find us when you're ready. And finally, I understood. They hadn't passed me. They had passed through the pain I gave them, and now they were waiting to see if I could do the same. Asterisk. The house was quiet. To quiet. No clinking forks, no laughter from the other room. No child chasing her imagination through the hallway. Only the slow tick of the clock on the wall, each second like a whisper saying, they're gone. The photo still sat beside me. The note, 5 words long, lay open on the table like a doorway to another future. Find us when you're ready. I stared at it until the ink blurred in my vision. I wasn't crying anymore. I had passed that stage. This was something else. Stillness, not peace, not numbness, something deeper, a recognition, a realization. This wasn't just the end of a dinner. This was the culmination of a lifetime of choices, mine. All those years. I thought I was protecting them by being strong, by being firm, by expecting the best. But in reality, I was just scared of being soft, scared of failing, scared of loving in a way I didn't understand. So I led with control instead of connection. And now, at the end of it all, I finally saw what I had created, a family that had survived me, but not with me, I stood and walked into the hallway. The house felt bigger than ever, every room echoing with memories, some warm, many cold. The hallway photos, our wedding, the kids' graduations, birthdays, the vacations that I half smiled through because I was distracted by work, money, expectations. I had documented a perfect family, but I hadn't lived in one. And now my son had chosen to move forward without me. Not with cruelty, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. And in doing so, he had taught me something I never expected to learn from the boy I once carried on my shoulders. Love isn't just presence, it's protection. And sometimes the most painful kind of protection is distance. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was protecting his family, the one he built from the ashes of the one I fractured. And what broke me most of all was that he had done it well. He was a better father than I had been, a better listener, a gentler guide, a protector not through force, but through love. I had spent years waiting for an apology that never came, when I should have been given one. I walked to the window and pulled aside the curtain. Outside, the snow had finally started to fall, soft flakes drifting slowly down. The world felt still, and for the first time in years, so did I. I realized that redemption wasn't about speeches or dinners or one emotional night. It wasn't about one grand gesture. It was about the quiet work, the hard work, the invisible work of changing yourself, not for them to forgive you, but so you could finally become the person they deserved all along. They weren't lost. They were simply waiting to see if I would do the work, if I would let go of pride, if I could stop asking to be seen as dad again and start becoming a man worthy of that name. I turned away from the window and looked back at the table. The photo, the note, a memory of who we once were, a chance, slim but still alive, to become something new. And that's when it hit me. The real miracle of the night wasn't that he came back. It was that he gave me a way forward, a narrow path, but a path nonetheless, one that started not with a phone call. Not with an apology, but with a commitment to be better, to be honest, to be present, truly, deeply, consistently present. So this was the realization. He hadn't ended our story. He had passed the pen to me.